Hey everybody, welcome to Every Child Belongs. This is a special episode where we've been getting some questions, and so we're going to answer some of them today. And I have my good friend, Dave Little, who also happens to be the producer of this podcast. And we've been friends for decades.
Yeah.
Decades. We have worked together. We work together at Crossroads Church. Dave is the creative director of Kids Club, so we work together on that. And we're friends, but we speak very truthfully to each other. So sometimes people aren't sure we're friends because we have really loud discussions. But we're like real friends.
Over the years, people have reached out to you or they've reached out to me, and they're like, "Are you guys good?" And we're like, "What do you mean?"
Good.
Like we laugh about it now because it's like we're great. Like, do you think we're not? And they're like, "Well, it just seems a little tense sometimes." It's like, no, this is great. Kim's a good friend, and we hang out, and everybody likes everybody. We're good.
Everybody, you've helped my children on things. So we're not just friends. We build on each other.
You've helped my wife. I've borrowed sourdough starter from your husband.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
We're good.
All the things. But you know what? I think that's a good example of people aren't used to discomfort. And if people are having a really intense conversation, it makes them uncomfortable and they think something wrong. But actually, there's nothing unsaid between the two of us. And we don't feel like we have to use filters.
Right.
Which sometimes makes people uncomfortable.
There's definitely a level of comfort between us. And we both like to move fast when it comes to projects.
We do.
So... And if there's an issue, we're happy to reloop and talk through it. But I don't remember the last time.
No,
so anyway,
we're good, everybody. So Dave, I'm glad to have you on, and you're going to be pitching some questions.
We've gotten a bunch of questions, and we're trying to be as specific, but also as general as possible to help as many people as possible. So I'm going to give the general question, and you're going to answer it, and I might have a couple of follow-up questions if need be. So
you be you, Dave.
I will be me. My first question is actually, Kim, can you talk about your new book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's been super weird to talk about. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was asking me questions that are actually answered in the book, but I never told him about the book. And then my husband said, why don't you text him and tell him about the book?
Self-promotion is tough.
It is. It's really hard. But anyway, the book is Boundless Hope for Every Child. And I wrote it because over the decades in working with kids and students, I have come to, and also because we adopted our two youngest, one at the age of 10 and one at the age of 15, I've come to understand, first of all, that trauma impacts a kid's behavior and the way they view the world. And people don't understand that. So they might see a behavior or a reaction from the child, and they judge who that kid is based on that. As through the ministry that you and I worked at, we also had a lot of kids who were neurodivergent, had disabilities, and I came to see that, oh, wow, they're really misunderstood too. So what this book is, it's for really anybody who engages with kids or students in any way, to help them better understand some of these responses that we might get that don't meet our expectations, and to help us then be a safe person for them, to help them meet their needs, to help them see maybe where they have gaps in skills so that they can really be everything that God created them to be. And I was talking to somebody who said, so basically it's just how to be a decent human being to kids who maybe aggravate you. I said, that would be a tagline. How to be a decent human being to kids who drive you a little bananas. Yes, that is what that is.
That is a potential subtitle for sure.
Yeah, there
cool.
You go.
Well, where can people get this book, Kim?
You can get it on kimbotto.com or Amazon.
And that's KIMBOTTO.com?
Yes.
Boundless Hope.
Boundless Hope.
I'm just helping you promote. I know it's tough.
I'm sorry. So. Yes, you can get it on Amazon. Boundless Hope for Every Child.
With
and then
energy.
You can also get it through Kimbotto, KIMBOTTO.com.
All right. So we're done with the promotion. You can relax
awesome.
now. We'll move on to the stuff you actually do want to talk about.
Cool.
So the first question is, why do kids with trauma disabilities, or neurodivergence sometimes behave in ways that seem defiant or manipulative?
So let's talk about first a kid who has experienced trauma. Their brain actually gets rewired. Like if you look at their brain, it's going to be different than a brain of a typical kid that has been raised in a loving, nurturing, encouraging environment. So because of that, a kid who's experienced trauma, often they are in survival mode. Something that we think might be no big deal. We experienced it once in kids club. We changed up the snacks, thought it was no big deal. But that change for a kid who's in survival mode, change makes them nervous. Then they don't know what's coming next, because in their life, often the thing that's coming next that's unpredictable is not good, and it hurts them. So their behavior is a way that they express what's going on inside. Same thing with a kid who's neurodivergent, especially, we have a lot of, increase in autism. Kids who have autism a lot of times have sensory differences, which means that, Dave, you've got a sweater on. You might have a tag in the back of that sweater that you don't even notice that it's there. A kid with autism, and this isn't every child with autism, but a kid with autism who's very sensitive to touch, that tag might take so much of his focus and energy that they really can't hear what you're asking them to do. So they're not being defiant when they respond. They can't hear you. They can get hyper-focused. Smells can make them hyper-focused. Sounds can make them hyper-focused. So a room in the school or a church that we think is super fun and engaging might be so overwhelming to them that then we'll see them have a meltdown on the floor. So we think that they're acting out. Well, really what they're trying to do is communicate through their behavior that this space is too much for me. I need headphones, or I need a break, or I need a snack.
So it's not defiant or manipulative. It's just them. What's the right word?
Well, it's them expressing their needs in the only way that they have able to express, and that's through their behavior. They don't have the words to tell us, I feel very overwhelmed right now by this loud music. Instead, they'll lay on their floor, maybe in the fetal position with their hands on their ears, which that's a clue. Oh, hands on the ears, maybe it's the noise. But Karen Purvis, who was a pioneer in working with kids from trauma, she says behavior is the language of children who have lost their voice. So these kids are talking to us. It's just that they're not using their words. They're using their behavior. They're using their facial expressions, their body. And so they're communicating to us. We need to listen to what they're saying to us through their body and behavior.
So the next question is, what are small, practical ways that can help create a more welcoming environment for kids? How can we move beyond welcoming families with disabled or neurodivergent kids to really including them?
I mean, a really simple way, and this is easy in the church because most kids have name tags on, say their name. Just saying their name. I mean, Dave, when somebody says your name, it makes you feel known. So say their name. Be flexible. For example, you may have everybody sit on the floor during the teaching segment. Maybe for some kids, this sitting in the middle of their peers is too much. So offer flexible seating. Maybe they can sit in the back. Maybe you have these wiggly seats, so kids who need to kind of get some energy out, they can sit in that seat. So say their name, be flexible. And I'd say too, be curious. If a kid comes in and isn't behaving in a way that you expect, well, be curious as to what might be going on with that kid. Maybe they're having trouble separating from their parent. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe it's too loud. Maybe there's some weird odors going on. Maybe their favorite leader isn't there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, say their name, be flexible, be curious.
I love that be curious part, because it's like being curious, just being naturally curious lets you get to know them better. And the better you know them, the easier it is to include them. And that applies to everyone.
Right.
That's not just kids with special needs or kids. It's humans.
Right. And you asked about welcoming and then including. Welcoming, yeah, you come on into my space. But include means we're really looking for ways for them to participate as much as they are able to participate, which means that we might need to be flexible and change the activity a little bit or give them a fidget so that might help calm them. We don't want them to just be there. We want them to feel like they belong and are a part of what's going on.
You're doing well with these answers, Kim. It's like you know what you're talking about. You've been doing this for a while. I would hope you'd know the answers.
I'm very old, Dave. I'm very old.
I didn't say anything
Lots
about
of experience. Whatever, Dave.
So next question. What do you say to a parent who's been hurt by a church or a school or an organization or an individual that they feel like they excluded their child?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry. It shouldn't have happened. I'm sorry that it happened. You know, working in the church, it happens way more than I would like for it to happen. You know, studies show that 1 out of 3 families that have a kid with disabilities have left at least one church because they've either been asked to leave or their child doesn't feel welcome. So that is not the way Jesus intended the church to be. I think for a parent what I would say to them is, you're a good parent. You know your kid better than anyone else. So don't take on judgment from other people as far as what your kid should or should not be doing, what they're developmentally able to do or not. You are the expert on your kid. And surround yourself with people, especially if you have a kid with differences, a kid who has experienced trauma or a kid who is neurodivergent. Get together with other parents who have kids who are similar. Because I know for me, when we adopted our 2 youngest, once I had a community of other adoptive and foster parents, it made me realize, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with my kid. It's just a different way of parenting.
Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't know that unless you got connected with other families.
No, because I had somebody that asked me, have you ever tried like just loving her unconditionally about my daughter? To which I had to bite my tongue and walk away because there was no way that in that moment, because I did love her unconditionally. And you can love a kid unconditionally. You can be doing all the right things and it still can be really, really hard. First, when we do get a question that feels offensive, I like to consider how might I advocate for this child in the moment. And if I just get mad and stormed off, I'm not going to be helping to educate that person on what differences this kid might have. Now, sometimes it is so hurtful, you do just have to pack your bags and walk away and then go find somebody to debrief with.
Yeah, if the response is going to be worse than walking away for a moment or taking a breather.
Right.
Yeah.
One important lesson I've learned in my old age, Dave, we don't have to respond to every comment made to us.
It's wise. It's wise. Well, that your last answer, Kim, actually serves up the next question, which is people who believe that love and stability should be enough to fix a kid's trauma. Like, what do you say to that? Or how do you talk with a person that says, "Oh, all you need to do is just love your kid and give them a stable environment"? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. So, like, why isn't "Love Is All You Need," like the Beatles song, good enough?
Yeah,
is basically your question.
Yeah.
Kids that experience trauma, they don't just get over it because they're in a safe and stable environment. They have learned through their experiences to react and respond in certain ways. Our daughter, Anastasia, we brought her home at 10. We live in a quiet little cul-de-sac and in a house with locks on the door. However, she felt like she had to hide her stuff because she had hidden her stuff for so long that just because she was in a different environment, she didn't change the way she was living her life. So it takes time, and we need to be patient with the kids, and we need to be patient with the parents too, because it's not just changing somebody's location doesn't change the beliefs they have about themselves and the world around them.
It just seems like a lot. You've got parents with a lot going on, and then they also have to remember to be patient and look at the long term, and try and educate people around them at the same time they're trying to process. And there's just extra stuff that these parents have to deal with.
Dave, that's one of the points of the book, Boundless Hope for Every Child, is making people aware that kids who do have differences, the parents do have a lot more going on. And so they need our grace. They don't need our judgment. They don't need our unsolicited advice. And we need to trust the parents that they know what is best for their kid.
We just need to be aware of people more.
There you go.
We need to
be curious.
We need to be aware of the fact that other people have other stuff going on, and it's out.
Right.
We may not be aware of all of it.
That's right. That's right. Well, one thing I always like to say about kids is that, and it's true with adults too, when a kid walks into our environment, their story started way before they walked into our environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with an adult, a neighbor that we see. There are all kinds of things going on with them that we don't have any idea. If I had just had harsh words with Mark before we got on the call, which I didn't, but if we did, I might appear much more grumpy than usual. And then you might interpret it as, she's got a beef with me. But no, it's something else. So yeah, we need to extend grace and be curious.
Next question. How can churches create spaces where foster and kinship families feel safe to share the hard realities without fear of judgment? And can you also explain to me I'm not familiar with the term kinship family.
Yeah, so a kinship family is a relative taking in a child that they are related to, but it is not a biological parent. So it could be grandma, aunt, uncle, sister.
Gotcha. Thank you.
There's been studies done, and adoptive, foster, and kinship families, what they say is the most helpful is to have support groups for them. And if you look at the church, so super high percentage, 97% of the families say support group really helpful. A very small percentage of churches actually have support groups. So whether you're a church or a school or some kind of community organization, providing a space that people with similar stories, so people who have brought kids who aren't their biological kids into their family, have a similar story, a space for them to share what's going on. Bring some experts in that just give we had support groups at a number of our sites for adoptive, foster, and kinship families. So bring somebody in that can maybe give them a little bit of information, new information, some training, and then the opportunity to talk about it. And then also, if that is not your story, then don't be offering advice. Somebody once told me, because somebody had said something to me about one of my daughters and what I should be doing. And a friend said, well, are they in the club? And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, so do they have adopted teenagers? And I said, no. And she goes, well, they're not in the club. You don't need to listen to them. Now, this doesn't mean that we're only going to listen to people that have the exact same story. But I know that parents who are raising kids who are neurodivergent often will get, like as you said earlier, it's well-intended advice or comments.
It's just ill-informed.
That they don't understand.
Yeah. And when you say support group, could you draw that out a little bit more? Like what could that look like, or what doesn't it look like? Or when I hear support group, that could look like a bunch of different things.
Yeah. It's an opportunity for people with a similar story, similar experiences to get together on a regular basis, weekly, every other week, monthly, in a somewhat structured format where they have they might have somebody come in giving some training or tips, and then they're able to discuss it in small group. And one of the things that we learned from our groups is sometimes we get these amazing speakers in. We think they're so good, we're going to have them talk the whole time. That's not what the parents wanted. They loved hearing from the expert. But even more important is they wanted to talk to other parents about what was going on in their life and apply what they had just heard to their own personal life, kind of wrestle through it and process. They need safe places to process. And going back to your original question, which you talked about, being a safe place to share their stories. That's what we're doing. We're creating a safe place where they know they're not going to be judged.
This is a tough list of questions, Kim. I'm glad you're the one answering them. So what do you say to a parent who is in denial that their kid has special needs?
Okay, so this question came from a church leader. And actually, when I'm interacting with church leaders, I get this question a lot. Our role as a leader in the church is not to diagnose a kid. What we want to do is we want to provide a safe space for this kid to come in and be who they are, to hear about Jesus, to make relationships with their peers. So even saying, hey, I know they have a diagnosis, but the parent is in denial, you can interpret that as a judgmental comment. Even if somebody is got the training to diagnose, well, actually, people who have the training to diagnose, on the weekends, they'll tell me, I can't diagnose a kid. And I would never ask somebody to do this. But there are things that you go through to diagnose a kid. So we don't know what is going on with a kid. So when I get that question, I tell the leaders, it's not our role to diagnose. It's our role to provide a safe place for them to grow in their faith, have fun with their peers, and really better understand who Jesus is. Is your goal to diagnose the kids in your ministry? And most people will say no. Okay, if that's not the goal, then instead focus on what that kid needs. Dig beneath the behavior to figure out what they need.
If your weekend is 5-minute distraction here, 5-minute distraction there, it just adds up to, over time, your ministry or your relationships or your community is not where it could be because you're going off track with stuff that's not within your strength, that doesn't align with your why.
Yeah, we get confused, and we don't need a diagnosis. We don't need to know the whole story to be flexible, curious, loving, and kind to a kid.
So this next question, I'm guessing based on some of the other answers you've given, you might get this question a lot, which is, my volunteers aren't equipped to handle this level of hard behavior. Am I really expected to take this kid in my ministry?
The short answer is yes. Jesus said, let the little children come to me, and he did not qualify them as far as they have to be kids who express their needs through words or are able to go from room to room unassisted. So because Jesus welcomed all the kids, I think we are too also. I also understand that it's hard and it can be overwhelming, and you don't have to do it alone. There are a lot of people will say, but I'm short on volunteers anyway. There are people in your community that maybe don't even attend your church, but like a speech language pathologist who works with autistic kids that wants those, she loves those kids, so she wants them to be able to find a place in the church. I've had speech language pathologists, OTs, PTs that don't go to our church that have helped me create the best environment for a particular kid. So don't do it alone. Reach out to other people. Work with the parent. And instead, often what we do is we're like, okay, at what point is it too much and I can say no? Instead, I would like us to go into it as, this kid is, their parents are trusting me with this kid. What can I do to make this work? Rather than looking at, how far do I really have to go before I can say no?
How can I get past this responsibility or out of this responsibility?
Yes. And I will tell you, Dave, I love kids. I love students. The kids who can't find their place other places, When we create an environment for them where they can just fully be themselves, that is the best. And it's not just good for that particular kid. The kids around them then see, oh, they'll start. I mean, I see them start connecting dots with kids that they may be in school who have maybe similar behaviors. And they start to understand that this kid is just different. They're not bad. They're not wrong. They just have different needs and express themselves in different ways. And what an awesome thing if the church can be the place where our kids can learn that.
That behavior gets modeled in a way that they then take on.
Yes.
So, Kim, this next question, we also got a lot, and it's, what should parents say when someone asks intrusive or inappropriate questions?
First of all, remember that your child is always your primary audience, not the person asking the question. Your child is. And it doesn't even make any difference if your child is present or not. But think about, you want to respond in a way that is honoring and with words that build your child up. And anybody who asks a question, you are not obligated to answer or to give any information. So at that point, I always like to stop. We consider what the relationship is with that person, what that person's relationship with my kid, how much information might be helpful for them, as they interact and engage with my kid. But one thing that's really important to know, that it's not our story, especially kids who've been through trauma. It's not our story. It's my child's story. And my job as a parent is to protect their story. And once I share parts of their story, there's no getting it back. It's out there. And I know that early on, I overshared. And it was with the intention of hopefully building up more empathy, for our two young daughters.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not our point. We have got to be very, very careful about what we share. So I always like to think about whether my child's there or not. Imagine that they are there and they're hearing the words that I'm speaking in response. And just know that we have permission not to respond. I mean, we can say, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable sharing that information.
Transparency is not the goal in this situation.
Yep. Right, right.
The next question is, how do we balance grace and accountability when disciplining kids with trauma, disabilities, or neurodivergence?
A big question that people seem to have that's around this is they don't want to give in to a kid. They don't want to show preferential treatment to a particular kid. If we give a kid what they need, that is not giving in, and that's not showing preferential treatment. If a kid needs to sit in a different part of the room, if a kid needs to take a break so that they can participate later, that is meeting the child's needs. Meeting the child's needs is not giving in. We still have to have boundaries. We can still have expectations. However, based on the kid, the way their brain is wired or the experiences they've had or what their abilities are, we may need to change expectations for a kid. We may be asking them to do something that they simply aren't able to do.
So the accountability and the expectations are unique to the kid?
Yes. Yeah, because some kids may be able to sit quietly at a table and do an activity just as we had intended it. Other kids, they may actually function better if they're standing up rather than sitting down. They may need to move a little bit. They may need to have the task broken up into smaller segments. They may need to have breaks during the time that they're with you, where other kids might not need a break.
Like, from your experience, do you see like one of the biggest struggles just being that getting people to think outside of what they expect normal to be and what their personal experience has been?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure. We have expectations of the kids that are often unrealistic. We also have, okay, here's the typical box. And I think a kid being typical is getting smaller and smaller. However, we still want kids to act like they're typical, even if their brain's wired differently or they've had some really hard things in their past. And that's not right.
Well, when you say typical, it's our personal definition of typical.
Yes. Yes.
Because I know, like, I had a good childhood. I also know that there were some things unique about my childhood that nobody else is like, oh, yeah, for sure. But then in my brain, that's a typical childhood. That's a typical expectation. So then, if anything, like my idea of typical is, or normal, or whatever you want to call it, like there is no absolute typical or normal.
There's not. And there could be a kid who comes from a really amazing, supportive environment, and they're just having a terrible day. Mm-hmm. They may have heard sad news about a friend's parent. Their fish may have died on the way out the door that morning. So when we approach kids with, how can I help them succeed, rather than how can I help them perform in the way that I expect, we're going to have much better outcomes.
So unfortunately, we need to wrap things up for this episode. I will say before this last question, if there are questions that you have that we haven't talked through yet, go to kimbotto.com, email, we'll put it on the next list. We will continue to do these mailbag question episodes. The final question, just a broad question for you, Kim. You've put a lot of time into helping kids and families. What's your hope? What's your goal?
Well, the title of this podcast is Every Child Belongs. That's my hope, that every kid has a place where they can contribute, where they can be cared for, but also where they can care for others, where they can be fully themselves. And in order for that to happen, the responsibility is on us as adults. The responsibility is not on the kid to comply or to conform to what our expectations are, because for some kids, because of the way they're wired or their background, they're not going to be able to meet our expectations, which means that it's our expectations that need to be changed, not the kid. And so many people feel like they need to have some type of advanced degree or, all this training. And really, it just comes down to being curious and not being judgmental. Because when we look at a kid, and if we immediately go to, oh, they're just not following instructions, or they're just choosing to do that, we are not going to respond in helpful and hopeful ways to that kid. So believing what Dr. Ross Green, who is an expert on behavior, he says children do well when they can. So if a kid is not doing well, they need our help. They need our compassion. They don't need our judgment. They definitely don't need our punishment. So that's my hope, that the people who are listening to this, if they see a kid who's having a meltdown at Target, which actually happened to me a couple weeks ago, instead of rolling your eyes, giving the mom, an ugly stare, stop and help. We had this other mom and I, we looked at each other. We both had kids with us. I had grandkids with me. We both looked at each other. Her husband saw us. He's going, I got it. So we sent all the kids to him. And she and I went to this mom. We checked her out. We're going through her wallet. The other mom is pulling. She goes, you want the blue credit card or you want the gold credit card? How awesome. And I'm not saying that to say, oh, look at me, I'm all that. It took me 3 extra minutes. This mom, she told us she had a huge cart full of stuff. She was getting ready to just leave. And she cried on the way to the car. She said, thank you. I don't know why he's acting like this. And we're going, we've been there. You're good. So what would happen if the world was more like that, where we look for opportunities to help rather than judge?
It's a great way to end, Kim. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Derek.